Yeah, my name is Käthe. I come from a West German, white, heterosexual academic background. I grew up in the last 2 decades of the Cold War, which meant that as a family, when I grew up, we always had everything we needed. And we had stuff on top too, nice things. We could afford nice things, which for my family were to eat well, good food, travel in Western Europe. We traveled a lot, which was great. We had a lot of really interesting people for dinner from all over the world. It was great. And when I wanted to learn something, I could learn it. So I think these were our luxuries. And for example, when I wanted to learn languages, my parents could send me abroad, and they did. And if I wanted to learn piano, I got piano lessons and so on. So that was great. But of course, growing up in West Germany at that time also meant that we, even as children, we knew that at any moment we could be in the front line of a nuclear war. And also as children, we knew that in case of a Russian advance, our allies, the Americans, had plans to nuke all of Germany to stop them, to save France. Kind of to turn our country into a wasteland to stop the Russians. So it was I think there were a lot of contrasts we had to navigate. And I know also that we were scared of the destruction of the environment. And when I think back, I think it extremely sucks how little has changed since then. My cousin and I, we also come from a long line of women with skilled jobs outside the house. We're the 4th generation. So our great-grandmother had a skilled job. She had her own money. She came from France to Germany 130 years ago or so. She was a French chef. And all her daughters and granddaughters had good jobs, which is probably something unusual. And it probably helped me in many ways, because there was never any question that I would have my own money and that I would have a good job and that I would get a good education, and that there would be no discussion about it ever. And coming from an academic background, it was also a lot about school was easy, a lot about university was easy. I didn't have to learn a new language, I didn't have conflict at home. So. And I think my mother fought through a lot of stuff with her mother that I didn't have to sort out with her. When I grew up, so my mother was a second-wave feminist. She was a 70s white middle-class feminist. So when I grew up, she would always tell me stuff like, if you ever split up with your partner, they have to leave the apartment and you change the locks. Or she would tell me, I don't show you how to darn your socks, because you will get a good job, and if there's a hole in your sock, you throw it out and buy a new one. Stuff like that. Of course, always assuming that I would grow up to marry a man and have a heterosexual family like she had, of course, because there was no other idea possible in that West German bubble. So, so that was a lot of privilege, I know. And it was a lot of fun also. And to come to oppressions, we had the nuclear war thing. But how shall I put it? In West Germany, which at the time, of course, had to show up and to prove that it was better than the socialist part of Germany. In West Germany, at the time, we had this ideal that Germany was a 2/3 society. I don't know if you ever heard about it. 2/3 society. It meant that 2/3 of West German society were more or less well-to-do and more or less middle class. And 1/3 was maybe very rich or very poor. But like 2/3 of us, 75 to 80% of us were supposed to be white middle class, and that was our normal. And there was this leftist discourse that we were all the same. We had all equal rights, but we were basically the same. Which sounds good, but it sucks. Because, I mean, as I said, going to school, a lot of it was easy. Going to university was easy, but being in school for me was hell. I mean, it was 7 years of hell. So when I finished school, I seriously thought at 18 that I would have to spend my life alone. Because I thought I had some kind of disability, like a social disability, and that it was that I just shouldn't complain about it. I just should accept it, because if I were in a wheelchair, it would be the same. Because I was just constantly bullied at school. And everybody told me it was my fault. Because there was no concept of bullying. And I think it came from this idea that we were all the same, also at home. Because we were not the same in reality, and we had never been the same ever. Because as I said, my great-grandparents were immigrants from France and Poland, and my grandparents were anti-fascists under fascism, and my grandfather was executed, and my parents didn't even tell me until I was 35. And my mother was a university teacher at a time when there were no women teaching at university. And I think she never had a place where she felt at home until she came to Berlin in her 50s, like the beginning of the 90s. And then she met all these other female professors of her generation. And we were not the same. I was queer, so we were not the same. And I think that created a lot of problems. So even though I came from a very liberal, leftist, intellectual, world-open, inspiring background, there was a lack of diversity. We had no queer family friends except our bookseller. And we had no people of color as our friends, and it was normal then. It was just, yeah. So, and looking back, I think that is why, for me, our struggle today has to be intersectional, necessarily. And also looking at these, 3-4 generation of skilled female women who had their own money, was when I grew up, my mother always said, look, you need to get a good job and you need to make good money. Because if you want to choose your husband, of course, yeah, if you want to choose someone you want, you need to have your own money, because otherwise you need to choose someone who can provide for you, and you don't want that. So make your money, have fun in bed, more or less, or have a good relationship. It's like interesting. But of course it's also very 70s, it's still right, I think. But where was I? Yeah, so that's what my mother told me. She told me a lot of good stuff. But when I look back at my family and all these amazing women, I also see the downside. Like, for example, the French chef, Antoinette. She had 2 children, and when her son died, she said to her remaining child, to her daughter, she said, it should have been you. You're a girl, I could have done without you. So for me, feminism means we need to stand together, and we need to reject the treacherous rewards that patriarchy promises us, and that makes us hate ourselves and hate our daughters and hate our sisters and hate our trans sisters and brothers and diverse people. That just makes us hate people who should be our allies and people we should be fighting for, who should be fighting for us. And I think a mother telling her daughter that she should be dead instead of the son is the best example for that. And then I look at my grandmother, who was an accountant. And after the war in the 50s, her husband, my grandfather was a great guy, loved him. He went into finance, and he said, sorry, Hilde, you have to stop working. It's also a nice story, I'll tell it later. She said, sorry, Hilde, you need to stop working because I'll lose credit. If my wife goes to work and has to earn money, they'll think I'm a gambler. And they cannot rely on me. The fun fact is he was a gambler, but he was a highly functioning gambler. So she had this education, she was used to having her own money, but she had to stop working in order not to sabotage his career. And as I said, and my mother was a university teacher at a time when there were basically no university teachers in Germany, which I think made a lot of stuff very hard on her. And she had a husband who claimed he was a feminist, but who was also... My father was always very much convinced that he had given up his right to a woman who was at home and who would take care of him all the time. And he kind of expected something back in return, because he had given up his privilege. And he never got over it. He kind of had to go on about it all the time. And in his later in his life, in his 70s and 80s, it actually came out that he despised homework. He refused to do it, not because he was too busy, but because he thought it was beneath him. I think it was quite a shock for my mother. And being a second-wave feminist for my mother meant that she was politically active, she was a public voice, she was a teacher. But when she came home, she would do all the housework. She had some help, but not, but still, my father didn't help at all. I mean, not at all. Not at all. He didn't even bring out the garbage. Yeah. So being a feminist at that time, for my mom, meant, what I saw was, being a feminist was, you do everything a traditional housewife does, you do all the housework, you look gorgeous, you cook great meals, you make brilliant conversation, and then you're allowed to work. You're allowed to do a full-time university job on top of it, with more teaching hours than your husband. So, and that's kind of, yeah. So for me, that means, yeah, we just need a different kind of society, where I think the main point here is that feminism and intersectionalism is not something that can be solved on an individual level. I think that what these examples show. It's not, because I think that's what my mom tried. Was like, okay, you're allowed to have your own job if you accomplish everything else. And that's also what society expected. And it doesn't work, in my opinion. It works when you're a brilliant overachiever like my mother, but still, it's like, so we need a society where it's okay to just be a part of this, not all of it. And for myself, as the fourth generation, well, I as a woman and a professor, so my mother never made it to full professor. She became an honorary professor, but never full professor. I am a full professor, kind of. I'm really surprised about it, because I'm an artist with training as an art historian, so I'm somewhere between the worlds, really. I don't really fit anywhere, and I still feel I work in a very, very hostile environment. University is trying its best, but it's so hierarchical, and it's still, there's so much sexual harassment going on there, which I'm not allowed to talk about because I could be sued for libel. And I'm angry all the time. It's a lovely job, it's well paid, it comes with a lot of statues in Germany. They got me through the glass ceiling. But there is so much hierarchy, and I'm still not a real person to those white men who are really the bosses there. I can feel it when they talk to me. I'm not as real as they are, I'm not as real to them as they are to each other. As a woman, as a queer woman, as an artist. I'm still something slightly strange, somebody you don't have to take as seriously as another white guy. And I think that is another point, we need to get somewhere where everybody is real. And I think Rebecca Solnit wrote a brilliant article about it, that our problem is that some people are more important than others. In the sense also of that some people think their freedom is impaired if they are not allowed to humiliate others or to exploit others or to insult others. And that they go to court and claim they have been, impaired of their rights because they think it is their right to deprive others of their rights. And I think that's one of our problems. That's why we need feminism. So, I think that's the first question. Well, I live mostly in former East Berlin. I commute to Flensburg, where I teach at university. But my basis is here with my partner, a number of animals. I take care of my parents, who also live in Berlin, who are in their 80s now. And my father is bedridden and in need of full-time care. We are privileged, so he has a nurse. But you still need a lot of... It's not enough to have a nurse. So I take care of my parents also. And I live in a very nice neighborhood. I moved there when I was a student. I moved into a very derelict apartment with a coal oven and no warm water that cost 500 marks. I still live in the same place. Now it's completely renovated. It costs 600 euros, which is extremely cheap for where I live. The entire neighborhood has changed completely. It's completely gentrified. The only reason is I can live there is because I have a 25-year-old contract and because I suddenly became a professor and my income went up. So I can still afford it. And my studio is around the corner. And just this year, the old lady who had owned the house where my studio is for like 100 years, who must have been 100 years old, she died, and there was a possibility that the house would go up for auction, and that meant it would be sold to investors and we would all have to leave. Like everybody who had their studio there and all the people who live there with very low rents, and a lot of them would have had to leave the city. Not just move to another part of the city, they would have had to leave the city. And we fought, and we managed to turn it into collective property, of course with the help of the heirs, of the owners. So I like to engage with my neighborhood in that way. I didn't have enough time because I'm going back and forth to Flensburg and teaching, so I couldn't contribute as much time as I wanted, but I'm a professor now, so I could contribute money. It was also good. I would have liked to contribute time to be there. But there was also a pandemic on, there were a lot of analog meetings, I couldn't go there because my partner is, she has an autoimmune disease and I need to protect her, and we cannot risk her catching COVID, too dangerous. So I couldn't go to the meetings. Yeah. That's one way I engage with my neighborhood. And I still like the neighborhood even though it's gentrified. And it's not getting gentrified at one point. But I also got gentrified myself. Yeah. Another way I engage with my neighborhood and with my city is that I keep discovering Berlin over and over and over again. And I'm also an urban forager as an artist. I recently started a very new project which is all about site-specific inks. So I go to one place and I collect all the materials that can make color in just one place and then make these like color charts for one address. And with natural colors made from not just dirt, rain, foliage, berries or whatever. Of course, never killing plants and keeping damage to a minimum. And I enjoy that very much. It's a completely new relationship to my environment. I was very surprised to discover that. I know it's probably nothing new at all for other foragers or gardeners. It was completely new for me. And I would have said, before I would have said, of course I know a lot of individual plants in my neighborhood. But now I know every bush by its first name. And this bush has given me leaves, and that bush has given me berries, and I've brought them coffee grinds to kind of, make it an equal exchange. And I'm learning the life cycles of plants and the name of plants, and there are so many plants around it. So it also changed how I see capitalism. Of course, I've always been critical, but it's completely different if you go out and you look for something and then you find and you make something out of it. It's not for free, it's kind of like a gift from the environment. It's different, feels different. So yeah, Also, if you miss the right moment to harvest the berries, then you'll have to wait a year. You cannot just order it on the internet. And I did that. Actually, I once did that. I ordered some kind of wood to make a special red color. I ordered it on the internet and it felt really shitty. It was like, it didn't work. It did not work. It was like cheating. Also, I don't know if they killed the tree for it. Also, there were emissions created in getting it to me. It was like, I haven't used it. It was like shit. So that's one way of engaging with my my environment. Yeah. And then if I want to say I engage for my countries, I would say, yeah, I do, because I am an employee of the state. I'm a civil servant as a university professor, and that means I try to teach my students as best I can. And I have a lot of very, very cool first-generation students who come from farms. It's not very diverse. The other day, the geography professor came over and said, hey, one of your students was in my class, the tall blonde. I was like, you know, they're all tall blondes, like 90% of them are tall blonde, you know, women, all of them. And I have like 2 students who are men and 2 students with non-German last names. But I love my students, they're really cool. And so I try to teach them how to figure out their own artistic strategies. I try to help them figure out how their personal ways of finding inspiration, and that I want to teach them how to do it without me so that they don't need me for it anymore. And that is what being a good professor is all about, I think. So that's also, it takes so much time. So I tell myself a lot that I have no time to engage politically in any other organization. I'm just so tied up. So that is where my political work has to happen. And I try to teach them about hegemonial culture. I try to tell them stuff their mothers should have told them and maybe didn't. Like things like, okay, if you're a woman and you get married to a guy, then there's a gender wage gap of 23% in Germany. So if you have a child, he makes more, you will need money and you will need time to look after the child. And he makes more money than you do. So it's kind of easier to have him work and you stay at home. And while you stay at home, he gets a promotion and earns more money. And because you're looking after the child, you can only work part-time. He makes even more money. And then if you get, you know, if you're sick of him and you want to get rid of the guy, then you only have a very low salary and a part-time job and not enough experience, you didn't build a career. Which you will all even feel in your old age when you look at your pension money. Which is how German society is structured, which is how our law works. And nobody tells them. So stuff like that. But the most important thing is that I engage internationally, and that's where I feel most at home. I engage as an international artist in my networks, which are mostly feminist intersectional networks about art and science. And art and science, in that case, of course, means that people are really crazy and often they are doing experiments about how to communicate with other species. They make art with bacteria. They think about utopian ways how we can save the planet. And there's this vivid exchange of ideas which normally takes place in an extremely constructive and respectful atmosphere. And I think that is what we need for all of us, and that's what we need for the planet. I think this is the opposite of petromasculinity. Well, as an artist, I try to speak to whoever it concerns, but I mostly want to speak to everybody who might be my ally, or whose ally I might be. I work with interviews like you do. because I want to make art that is not about one voice or one body or one perspective on space. So a lot of my work is about participatory approaches, about collective authorship. It's also a lot about hybrid bodies, a lot of chimeras and monster-type figures which I release into public space. And I have a project, an interview-based project about migration. My grandmother was a refugee, and a lot of the dialogue, a lot of the discourse about migration focuses on tell me about your trauma, which I think is completely inappropriate. And when are you going back, which is also inappropriate. But what I find interesting and what I would love to ask my grandmother is, how did you manage to arrive after you lost your home? How did you manage to make a good life after the stuff you'd gone through? And that's what, and we know that migration is treated as an exception, but it is the future and it is normal. It has always been normal, will always be normal, and it will become a lot more with the climate crisis. A lot more. And one thing I find interesting about migration as a skill is the skill of arrival, and what you need and what strategies do people develop every day to arrive and to make new networks and to make a place their own. So that's what that project is all about. And yeah, so yeah, who do I speak to? I try not so much to speak, I also try a lot to listen actually. And speaking is in very rich supply. Everybody is speaking, everybody is learning as part of their education how to speak. Everybody is speaking all the time on social media, and I'm not sure if anybody learns to listen anymore, but listening is what we need. So listening, like really making space for someone else, like you're doing now. And you know that is a special skill, and you know how it takes energy, it takes practice, to make this respectful space for someone else, to listen, to respect them in how they are, to kind of love them in that moment, for just let them be. And I think we need much more of that, because the problem is nobody is listening, nobody is taking care of anyone else. We had that discussion here also, that we need to get out of the caretaking trap, especially as women, but I think it's the other way around. We need everybody to listen and take care of each other, of themselves, of the planet, because listening and seeing someone else is the opposite of abuse, it is the opposite of violence, and it's the opposite of how we are treating other species and the planet now. So I think that's what we need. So I try to make my work also about listening. So is this personal or collective? And yeah, I think the answer is my personal experience compels me to search for something collective. That's very, yeah, that's it. Definitely, all the time, intersectional feminist.